Hello and welcome to this video. This video will talk about how the literature review connects with the requirements list, which then connects with the testing, and how these are interconnected. And I'm using the idea of triangulation to explore that interconnectivity. Just a normal disclosure, remember these videos are here to give a very simple understanding of a topic, and you should always discuss the ideas which I present in these videos with the person who is marking your work. At the end of the day, they will be awarding you the marks, not me, and they may want you to do it slightly differently. So always check. The first thing I would like to do is situate the idea of the literature review, testing and artifact requirements into the report, because we'll all have to write a report about this. So looking at the literature review, this is background reading, some people call it. Essentially, it's knowledge which the reader needs to know to understand your artifact. There's much more specific terms which we'll go into in a different video. But essentially in here it will be topics which will give the reader enough knowledge to understand the artifact. At the end of your literature review, you will summarise, you will identify the key ideas, the key themes in your literature review which you will take to your list of artifacts. Some of you will capture primary data. That primary data can also feed into your literature review, and the literature review can feed into your primary data. At some point though, this primary data will need to feed into your list of requirements. Now everybody will do a slightly different report. Some of you will do just a literature review, some of you will do a combined primary data and literature review which informs the artifact requirements. Now think of the artifact requirements as a list of success criteria for your artifact. If your artifact can achieve each one of the items listed in that success list, then your artifact is fit for purpose. And the way we can say that the artifact is fit for purpose is by saying we are going to test each one of those requirements. And by testing to prove that the requirements are working as required, we can then say that the artifact is fit for purpose. So that's how this idea fits into the written report. Okay, presenting requirements. First, I'm going to look at the gold box over on the right hand side. I'll just put a little squiggle there for you. When we think about requirements, we can have a whole host of requirements, from software, hardware, the person who's buying the software, the client, the user of the software, interface requirements, and the list goes on and on and on. And you need to decide where you're going to situate your requirements. And this will shape and structure your artifact. For example, you may decide that you will focus on the client, the user, and the interface requirements of the artifact. And this is something you need to do in your mind so you understand where you are going with your artifact. But as always, chat with your supervisor to make sure you're hitting the requirements of the assessment. If we now move over to the left hand side of the screen, I want to have a look at where it says module authentication. I've just underlined that. If we were presenting requirements to software programmers, then this could be the approach we would use, because it represents a module which you would see in a computer program. So it's audience specific, in this case programmers. If we go to the table below, I've just put another yellow line, we can see that the requirements is listed differently, and we could use this type of table or list of requirements for artifacts such as newsletters or policies and those type of things. So the point I'm making is the way in which we are presenting the requirements is influenced by the people who are reading or engaging with the requirements, which is also influenced by the artifact. So it's like a triangle in itself. And again, speak to your supervisor and get some thoughts and some guidance around this. Your supervisor might say, well, actually, you create a list of requirements for programmers, so the top example would be most appropriate. Or they might say, well, actually, your artifact is more about policy creation. In that case, we should be using something like the table on the lower half of the screen. You also need to have a little discussion about how will you present the requirements. Are you going to present the requirements by the three sections, so client, user, interface, or are you going to present them all in one giant table? Separate them out into three tables. These are discussions you need to have with your supervisor and in your own mind, because some of us like the decomposing. So they'll love a table which says client requirements, another table that says user requirements, another table that says interface requirements. It's easier to manage. In terms of how does the list of requirements link to the literature review, I want to talk about that on this slide. So over here we have the literature review, and as a reader of your literature review, I'm reading this information here, and as I'm reading that, I'm thinking, oh, this will be part of the student's requirements. So here we go. That's me thinking. So I know when I get down to your actual artifact requirements in your report, I should be looking for something to do with best practice and some form of username. And I keep reading and I come across another topic in your literature review looking at passwords in best practice. So in my mind, I'm now thinking there'll be something in the artifact list of requirements about password design or password construction. In the summary, I can see that this person has clearly identified that the principles of best practice around username and password are critical to the success of the artifact. So they've taken the core ideas which they discussed in their literature review and summarised it in their summary. And if I went from their summary straight to their list of requirements, I will see requirements for all the key themes and ideas presented in this summary. So as the reader of your literature review, I'm doing two things. I'm reading and thinking, oh right, I'm looking for this topic in your list of requirements. When I get to the summary of your literature review, you're telling me I am transferring the knowledge and ideas around these topics and themes into my list of requirements. And when I turn to your list of requirements, I can see these themes and principles in there. So they are matching. And that's really, really important. If you get this part wrong, it gives the supervisor and the marker an opportunity to pick apart your artifact and your requirements. So be careful and always seek advice from the marker about what they're anticipating and expecting. Moving on to think about testing and the list of requirements. Before I talk about the screen, let me just talk about what I say to my students when I'm supervising their projects. I say, I recommend that you include a test plan and some evidence of you implementing that test plan. And the reason I make that recommendation is this. As a marker, it's very hard not to give students marks when they've presented a test plan and evidence of implementation. So you're forcing me as a marketer to give you marks. I know from your point of view, from the student's point of view, it feels like a lot of work, but actually you're forcing me to give you marks. But have a chat with your marker, because everyone does it slightly differently, and see where it all fits together from your point of view. Anyway, let's get to the requirements and testing. So here I'm looking at the username, which is in the list of requirements, and then below I have a test plan or a test table. Within there is the username, there we go, and I'm going to test the username using these two types of tests. And I know if I've been successful or not because this will be my output. And remember, the reason we are testing the list of requirements is to say to the client or your marker that your artifact is fit for purpose. That's really important. The testing is there to say that the artifact works, that it's fit for purpose. Now, when we're testing, we can test for lots of different reasons. But what I'm going to say to you is this. Think of it in this way. We're testing to prove that the artifact is working. And once we've got that sorted, we're then testing to improve, to refine the artifact, to make it the best it can be within the scope of your project. That's really important that you understand that in effect we're doing two types of testing, or two stages in your testing. Testing to prove that the artifact works, and then testing to make it more efficient, to make it better. And as always, have a chat with the person who's marking your work. Okay, one last slide about the test plan. And before I talk about the full table, I just want to talk about this third column here. It says SC number 1. That links back or cross-references back to somewhere right at the start of your project in your introduction where you said you want the artifact to result in, let's say, a 10% reduction in complaints. By implementing the artifact, you will achieve that 10% reduction. And what I'm saying is the requirement number 1 links to that success criteria, which comes from the start of your report. Now you might have 3 overall or overarching success criteria, in which case this different requirements will achieve different overarching success criteria. So that may be a column you want to include in your test plan. And what you're doing is you're saying to your marker that you understand how this artifact is achieving each one of those overarching success criteria. And that's really important for lots of different reasons. But let's look at the overall table now. So in the first column, I've got number 1. That's my first requirement from my list of requirements. And this is the actual requirement here. Before we can test that requirement, I need to make it measurable in some way. So what I've done is I've decomposed the requirement into 3 distinct parts. We should have done a decomposing as part of your course by now. And to test this element of the first element of the requirement, I am going to use these checks or these indicators. Okay. And the evidence I can use to prove that I've done that is listed here. So the point I'm making is we need to think about how we can go through this process when we're testing. How can we decompose the requirement to make it measurable? And that's in my 4th column. And then how can we test each one of those components which we've deconstructed from that requirement? And what evidence can we use? And as always, have a chat with your marker, because they will have a better idea, because they will know what your project is about. I'm just talking about projects in a general term. Right, so to summarise, I talked about how the topics, information from the literature review feeds into your list of requirements. And I talked about how testing supports whether your artifact is successful or not, and therefore tests the actual requirements in your list. And by doing so, you're saying that the information from your literature review, which has been passed into your list of requirements, has been implemented successfully, therefore creating that triangle.